between the ministers. Let us speak about the situation around Ukraine. The neo-Nazis are attacking residential areas and social infrastructure of Russian regions. For this purpose, they are actively using long-distance arms provided by the US and some other states, including cluster munitions. Every day, we receive messages on attacks against cities and towns of Donetsk and the Lugansk People's Republics. On December the 2nd, the Ukrainian armed forces attacked Lysychansk. 4 people were injured. On December the 3rd, more than 30 munitions were fired against Donetsk, Gorlovka, and Makeyevka. Many of them are severely injured. Yesterday, on December the 5th, these settlements were once again attacked by the Bandera soldiers. Donetsk Community College, 2 schools, and kindergartens were attacked. These are the targets of the Kiev regime. This is the real objective, to kill everything which is peaceful, everything that exists in harmony, everything that does not tolerate this destructive logic imposed on the Ukrainians by the NATO and the collective West. The Ukrainian armed forces are firing against the Belgorod region. On December the 4th, they fired 66 munitions against municipalities. They are still making attempts to commit terrorist attacks on the territory of the Russian Federation with the help of drones. On the night of December the 5th, air defense forces downed 22 drones and intercepted 13 drones over the Crimea and the Azov region. The courts of the Russian Federation, on the basis of the evidence collected by the Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation, are continuing to make sentences for the Ukrainian neo-Nazis. The militant Taran was sentenced to life for killing civilians in Mariupol. A neo-Nazi from the Azov battalion, Rozhevitsky, was sentenced to 24 years in prison. He was executing the orders of his commanders to kill all civilians who are close to military positions. He killed an innocent woman for allegedly adopting a pro-Russian position. A neo-Nazi Zechuk was sentenced to the same term. He killed a civilian for supporting the Russian special operation. We are continuing to collect evidence of the crimes committed by the Ukrainian armed forces. No one will escape responsibility. In Ukrainian media, we see details on the visit of Lloyd Austin to Kiev. During his meeting with Zaluzhny, the head of the Ukrainian armed forces requested 17 billion of munitions in order to fund the restoration of the Ukrainian borders of 1991. Zaluzhny will need around $350 billion. Now Ukraine is a giant black hole where immense material and human resources are burning. This black hole is not an illusion. This is a mechanism used to distribute resources illegally. And this is a way of robbery in this horrible scale. No one understands where all these resources are spent, where they are going. Everyone knows. It is a common known fact. And the representatives of the Middle East are stating this, the representatives of the North of Africa. It is a well-known fact that the arms which was delivered to Ukraine by the United States and some other NATO countries is found in the Middle East. And these are not some individual cases. It does not happen on a time-to-time basis. It is a mass phenomenon. They find these arms in the Middle East, these very arms which were delivered to the Kiev regime to commit an aggression against our state. Do you believe that no one in Pentagon and in the State Department is aware about this fact. They know very well that they are taking part in a great mystification campaign, killing millions of people. They are involved in a corruption scheme. You know very well how much finance is coming back from the Ukrainian institutions, and how many units of equipment never reaches Ukraine. Perhaps it is redistributed in Ukraine, it is later resold there, or perhaps it is inscribed on the account, but there are no arms and there is no equipment, in fact. It has been resold long ago. Everything. We have discussed all this in details. And we have mentioned all this when the special military operation began. And before, we have discussed these corruption schemes between the collective West, first and foremost, the United States, the Great Britain, Brussels, their collusion with the Kiev regime. It is becoming more and more difficult to fund the Kiev regime day after day, from every point of view. Ideological, financial, I would say moral, but the West has no moral values. But when it comes to the ideological point of view, to explain what is their interest there, it is intolerable. Before the end of the year, they will have no finance for Kiev. They are stating this publicly and openly. On December the 4th, the head of the budgetary office of the White House, Shalanda Young, made this revelation, and an aide to the U.S. president on national security stated this openly. This is a direct quote. "There is no magical pot of funding available to meet this moment. We are out of money, nearly out of time." This is the end of quote. I do not know. I thought that the United States were capable of printing money, and I thought it was their magic pot. The Zelensky regime is receiving alarming signals from the European Union, where they refused to provide 50 billion of euro for Kiev. The Western states have repeatedly stated that they never know where their financial assistance ends up. In these conditions, it is becoming more and more difficult to explain to the electors why billions of dollars were wasted on the corrupt regime of Zelensky. Let us help them. It is not only the Zelensky regime which is mired in this bloody corruption, but also those who fund him. How it could be different? These corrupt officials would not have money in a different case. They are not producing anything. They are not selling anything. They are selling only the lives of their peoples. This is not a paradise. It is investment paradise, and this is not a potential place for the investment. Nevertheless, billions of dollars and euros are allocated to Ukraine. And in fact, without these allocations, without these so-called investments, there would have been no corruption in Ukraine. And when these NATO states accuse Zelensky of corruption, you should be consistent, and you should go to the final point. You should state that you are responsible for funding this corruption. And the most interesting thing that the NATO and the US, they say that this money could have been spent on more decent affairs, for instance, on medicine or in social spheres. Where do they find medicine and social spheres in Ukraine, which is oriented on the population of Ukraine? Let us remind them that the medicine over the last decades and over the last 10 years exactly, the medicine system in Ukraine was fully integrated into the American system, not the health system, but the system of investment. It became a part of a military machine of the United States. Biological laboratories who were functioning under the auspices of the Ministry of Health of Ukraine. In fact, these were biological laboratories used by the Pentagon. We cannot speak about any social sphere in Ukraine. It is ridiculous. For many years, they are not paying social benefits, salaries, retirement benefits for their own population on the south and the southeast regions of Ukraine. And now nothing has changed. Perhaps they qualify this bloody mobilization and drafting campaign as a social sphere when people are drafted with under the threats of being killed. Is this the work with the population? Is this the so-called social sphere? And the guaranteed social benefits for the people of Ukraine? We have repeatedly stated that the Kiev regime lost any remnants of its statehood and independence. It deprived Ukraine of independence and the territorial integrity. Its domestic and foreign policy is defined only by its Anglo-Saxon supervisors. It is not surprising that Kiev ignored the landmark event, December the 1st. Let me remind you about this date. It marked the 32nd anniversary since the decisive resolution was made when the all-Ukrainian referendum was held. And the act of independence of Ukraine was reaffirmed. You are asking why this is all irrelevant now. They do not even remember this. They had an order to forget everything. They had to forget about the conditions on which they gained independence and what remained of it. But let me remind you that during the referendum on December the 1st, 1991, the people of the country reaffirmed the independence of Ukraine. Thus, they recognized the need to strictly follow the Declaration on State Sovereignty of Ukraine. At the same time, Ukraine declared its intention to become a neutral state, not to be a part of any military bloc, and to acquire a non-nuclear status.
And of course, it is clear why they do not celebrate that day and why this historical fact has been forgotten. It is obvious. As obvious it is that the Kiev regime has long ago put an end to Ukraine's future as a sovereign state and set a course for its enslavement by transatlantic corporations and transformation into a colony of the West. We've noticed the news of the mobilization by the miners of the Ukrainian armed forces. These are not voluntary fighters. These are not sons of the fighters. This is forced mobilization, or any word you could use. This is the mobilization of armed forces Ukraine by the miners. The first group of the Hitlers, which consists of teenagers, have already been involved in the 103rd Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. And I'd like to ask Mr. Zelensky a question. Does he still remember the word, "Those are the kids"? And those words should not have been said about very independent people, but right now. And address this question to those who came up with this idea, who thought about enlisting orphaned teenagers, about enlisting them in Ukrainian armed forces, and to send them off to die immediately. This is where this phrase would be useful. Those are just children, because they are in fact children. And it's easy to brainwash them and then send them to the grave of course, under the yellow and blue flag. That is the patriotism according to the Kiev regime. This is the liberal democracy prepared by the collective West for the Ukraine. Despite the fact that initially the children were allegedly promised to be kept in the rear areas of the Kharkiv region, there are already reports of the first orphans killed on the battlefield. Where is everyone? Where is UNESCO? Where is Miss Azoulay? They always pay attention to everything, and they react. What about the civil societies, about international organizations, about the elected systems? Do they want to think hard and maybe discuss the fact how the Kiev regime in the 21st century, based on neo-Nazi ideology, is doing the modern Hitler Youth? The director of the orphanage from which one of the teenagers was taken has reported that the 17-year-old pupil was killed near the village of Novosolovskaya. In its spiteful desperation, the criminal regime of Zelensky has reached an extreme degree of brutality. If it has already started to send even children to death, to an obvious death. And it all stems from the Second World War, or the Great Patriotic War as we know it. Its actions resemble the agony of the Third Reich in 1945. Women, elderly people, and now orphan teenagers are dying in the trenches. The extermination of the Ukrainian people is being carried out by the hands of the fascists in Kiev. The fighting is being carried out by Kiev to please the West, to the less Ukrainian. And it's not even a figure of speech. It's not a symbol of anything. It's just a fact. The West has decided to eradicate the Ukrainian population. What about the national question? We were always told that they have the spread of forces according to the nationalities, that it guarantees of the impossibility of reincarnation of neo-Nazism, fascism, racism, and so on. But we see what it's leading to. The nation is being eradicated. On the 24th of November this year, the Ukrainian government submitted to the Verkhovna Rada a draft law on amending certain laws of Ukraine regarding the consideration of expert opinions of the Council of Europe and its bodies on the rights of national minorities or communities in certain spheres. What does this complicated name entail? The drafters do not hide the fact that they were forced to take this step by the hope of joining the European Union. Let me remind you that the requirement to bring Ukrainian legislation in line with European norms in the sphere of protection of national minorities' rights was put forward to Kiev by the European Commission as one of the main conditions for the start of negotiations on the European Union membership. So what does that entail? Just think about it. It's planned to adjust a number of laws regulating language policy in Ukraine. The law on the state language, full general secondary education, higher education, national minorities. So what is it aimed at? It is aimed, first of all, at expanding the rights and scope of application of official languages of Europe, of countries. You're probably going to think that it's of Ukraine and its nearest neighbors. But the neighbors that used to be a united space before, no, it's only aimed at expanding the rights and the use of official languages of the European Union itself. In particular, for speakers of these languages, it is envisaged to provide school education in the native language during the whole term. Secondary, specialized, and higher education European Union languages is also allowed at the Ukrainian territory. Some relaxations are envisaged in the field of advertising, book publishing, and mass media. What about the Russian language? The same language that is the means of natural communication for millions of the citizens in that country, and it has been like that for a while. The following picture emerges. Within 5 years after the end of this war, the provisions of the law of national minorities will not apply to the Russian language. It is unclear how the situation will develop further. In any case, education in the Russian language will continue to be prohibited. There is nothing that would differentiate these steps of the European Union and the Kiev regime and all their NATO handlers from the US, from the UK, from the actions of the Nazis in order to reshape humanity according to their own point of view, according to their own on how to re-educate people in order to work out a new human being, form out a whole new people in a new, which is very different from its natural habitat, space that will have a new culture, new language, new education, a whole new history. These are identical situations, and we will speak more on that later. The draft law clearly highlights the neo-Nazi nature of the Kiev regime, led by the Western handlers. The amendments are language segregation and outright mockery of Ukrainian citizens. There is no doubt about it, because there is not a single fact that could be presented in defense of that. Russian is not the language of a national minority. In addition to ethnic Russians in Ukraine, it is spoken by Ukrainians, Belarusians, Armenians, Jews, and representatives of many other nationalities. Where is everyone? Where is the whole international community? Everyone is staying silent. And I mean the representatives of the European Union, who are also part of the OSCE, who is also staying silent. Of course, the European Council have nothing to do with this. They only care about reshaping the Ukrainian people to enslave them fully. So I'm really curious, just think about it. This is already being implemented today, and for what cause? For people to lose any understanding of their surroundings, to lose themselves in the process. So they will become obedient. They will project the will of the people who are observing Ukraine just as a large margin of land. And it has always been observed like that. Although the bill is still under consideration and its final wording is still unclear, one thing is for sure. The Russian language cannot be destroyed. They will never be able to do it. Despite the bans being imposed, people in Ukraine continue to communicate, watch movies, listen to songs, and search for information on the internet in Russian. On December the 4th, an international scientific and practical conference, Ukrainian Nazism in the 21st Century Roots and Branches, was held in Moscow. It was attended by scholars, experts from a number of countries, including Belarus, Serbia, Italy, and France. Commissioner for Human Rights, Democracy, and the Rule of Law, Director of the Department for Multilateral Cooperation on Human Rights, spoke on behalf of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The participants came to an unambiguous conclusion. In Ukraine, we're dealing with fascism at the state level. Ukrainian Nazism is not a local phenomenon, but a problem of the whole world. It is spreading and popularizing everywhere. And Nazism is a blood brother of racism. And it's only a reincarnation of the same logic of uniqueness and domination, of superiority. And throughout the century, it had a different face. This is its face today. Through its revival, there is a return to the neocolonial racist policies of the West. That is why the special military operation continues. And every day, we are gathering more and more evidence, not only of its alignment with time, but only of its correctness. There have been a lot of questions about the F-16s and its passage to Ukraine. NATO member states continue to heavily arm Ukraine. The next in line is the supply of F-16 tactical fighters to the Ukrainian armed forces. They have been talking about them for a long time, and a whole separate coalition of countries has been created that will transfer the planes to the Kiev regime and train Ukrainian pilots. Given that a significant part of Ukraine's airfield infrastructure has been destroyed, it is possible that these American fighters will be based outside the country, in Poland, Slovakia, and Romania. And thus the North Atlantic Alliance is getting deeper and deeper entangled in the Ukrainian conflict. And as we understand, it's just leading a hybrid war against our country under the pretext of saving the country. And they've also agreed that their main goal is to prevent a confrontation with Russia, which is laughable. In reality, the risks of a direct military clash between Russia and NATO are only increasing. For the Russian armed forces, fighter jets participating in the conflict on the side of the Ukrainian armed forces, no matter where they're flying from, will be a legitimate target for destruction.
Speaking about the evacuation of Russian citizens from the Gaza Strip, after on December the 2nd, we resumed the stage-by-stage release of foreigners from this region through Rafah crossing. We received this information yesterday in the end of the day. Please understand that these figures can change within several hours. On December the 5th, a special Amercom plane brought 120 people from Cairo. The on-site group of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other specialized agencies assisted the arrived people through customs and border control. The Russian diplomatic missions managed to bring 898 citizens of Russia and Palestinian family members. 883 people have already arrived in Russia. Russian diplomatic missions are working with Israeli, Egyptian, and Palestinian authorities to evacuate Russian citizens and their Palestinian family members from the Gaza Strip as soon as possible. Let us speak again about racism and neo-Nazism. I would like to attract your attention to the fact that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have prepared one more report regarding the glorification of the Nazism, the spread of neo-Nazism, and other practices that contribute to fueling contemporary forms of racism. This document is translated into English. It is published on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You will have the link in the text version of this briefing. This report is prepared in the spirit of the Russian efforts to preserve the historical truth on the process and the outcomes of World War II. We would like to underline that year by year we see increasing negative trends which are provoked by the overt double standards and revenge-seeking sentiment. This year is no exception. The previous campaigns to falsify the history and to distort the role of the USSR in winning the victory over Nazism, they had not gained a powerful impetus, but they are imposed now in public rhetoric. These immensely cynical acts are aimed at revising history. They want to change the roles of aggressors who unleashed the biggest war in the history of humanity and those who put into practice the ideology of racial exceptionalism and the state member of anti-Hitler coalition who won the decisive victory. Today we see an increasing number of states who honor the collaborators as fighters for independence of these states. By all possible means, they are trying to reshape the public consciousness. This year, the world saw the first case of public roaring applause to the so-called personality, outstanding personality, as it was the case in the Canadian Parliament. In order to fight the Russian world and Soviet memorial heritage, nationalists, radicals, and other extremists are involved. They were fighting side by side with the Nazi back then. And now, they are the role models of the so-called right patriotism. You know there exists a new normalcy and the right patriotism. The roles and objectives of such countries in the Euro-Atlantic concept of the rules-based world order are quite clear. Russia sees many reaffirmations that these roles of these states damage the interests of their own people. In February 2022, the Russophobe activities of the collective West gained another impetus and another motive for its justification after Russia started its special military operation to protect the population of Donbass. In practice, that meant that many Russians were discriminated against. Nothing has changed in 2023. These trends only reaffirm the point Russia advocates for, that racial discrimination and glorification of Nazism pose a direct threat to the values of genuine democracy and defending human rights. They challenge regional and international security. It is essential that the overwhelming majority of the world community shares Russian vision on combating glorification of the Nazism. This is reaffirmed by the UN General Assembly resolution combating glorification of Nazism, neo-Nazism, and other practices. You know the title of this resolution. Let me remind you that it was Russia who initiated the elaboration of this document, and together with many co-authors from all over the world, it submits it for the consideration of the UN General Assembly. The provisions of this resolution serve a traditional foundation for this report. I mean the report that I have mentioned on glorification of the Nazism. Speaking about another very important historical fact, which gained another estimate and legal recognition. On December the 1st of this year, the Kaliningrad Regional Court recognized the Nazi crimes committed on the territory of East Prussia as genocide of the people of the USSR. I'm not going to quote the provisions of this document, but we will publish the quotes in the text version of this briefing. Let me remind you that the goals and objectives of Germany in its war against the Soviet Union was to destruct the statehood of our country, to seize the new territories, and to exterminate the population living there. It was all openly stated by special documents and special guidelines of the German forces. They had to completely destroy the so-called defenders of the Soviet system, to use the so-called unpunished excessive violence against prisoners of war and civilians, to organize the mass deaths of Soviet citizens from starvation. End of quote. And these are very people who are honored in Ukraine now. Every year, they are saying that it was the Soviet Union who started them. Please forgive me, but this is not the denial of the truth. It is the distortion of the truth. When you know the truth, perhaps they remember the facts, but deliberately they are doing everything just the other way around. The territory of East Prussia was no exception to the general rule, despite the fact that at the time of the outbreak of the Great Patriotic War, it was the part of Nazi Germany. Here, as on the entire territory of the Third Reich, they implemented a criminal plan to exploit Soviet prisoners of war and civilians. They were living in very dire and very difficult conditions and further exterminated. To achieve these goals, the German command issued an order on the treatment of Soviet prisoners of war, which said, the direct quote, "The Bolshevik soldier has lost all rights to claim to be treated as a non-honest soldier in accordance with the Geneva Agreement. Inobedience, active or passive resistance must be immediately and completely eliminated by force of arms. In the case of Soviet prisoners of war, it is a direct quote from the German document, even for disciplinary reasons. In order to guarantee discipline, weapons should be used very decisively. Those prisoners of war who escape, they should be fired at immediately without a warning call. No warning shots should be fired either. And this is a document. This is what was written not by a mad philosopher somewhere in his valleys of his mind. It is something that has gone through institutional verification. It was adopted as a guideline in the Third Reich. Does this remind you of anything? This is exactly how their successors are acting. The Ukrainian neo-Nazis, in order to implement the criminal acts, no less than 47 concentration camps were in function. Stalag 1A was one of the largest ones. Through this camp, which functioned until January 1945, more than 250,000 prisoners of war came there, including 90,000 Soviet prisoners of war, 80,000 of French prisoners of war, 40,000 of Polish ones, and 23,000 of Belgian prisoners of war. The Soviet prisoners of war were housed in the camp, which was extremely crowded. For instance, up to 500 people could rest in one barrack. The Germans considered the poor health and sanitation conditions as a rule. It is not surprising that the very high mortality rates were provoked by very poor conditions. Does this remind you of anything? This is the logic of contemporary times. Cancel everything which is associated with Russia. Let the ideology of the beautiful garden dominate. These are the words of Borrell, the representative of the European Union. Only the beautiful garden, from the point of view of the West, needs everything: food, water, medications. No one else needs this. Something from the rest. Do you believe the case was different during the pandemic? Do you remember the schemes organized by the West with our vaccines? Russia was the first to invent the vaccine. It was the first to offer this vaccine to everyone. Joint production, joint testing. It was the part of humanitarian assistance and humanitarian efforts. And what came next? They even did not allow us to make certificates for our vaccines. They made a mess on international platforms in the World Health Organization. Who is responsible for this? The West is. They could not let the world use scientific achievements of those whom they historically believed as second-rate people and labeled in this way. Back then, during the Great Patriotic War, there was an Ostlebermark. And let us just see how they call us now. Mass media, our news on in the West are coming with a special yellow label, so that they know that these are not regular news, some different news, some dangerous news. Back then, the prisoners of war were liberated. It happened on February the 10th in 1945. They were liberated by the Belarusian army. The facts of killings of the prisoners of war were later reaffirmed during the investigative committee verification procedures in Kaliningrad region. Also, they implemented one more principle, that the civilians residing in these areas should become the resource base for the Nazi army. They should provide them with everything needed to continue their war. Does this remind you of anything? They are adopting the very same attitude towards the Ukrainian citizens. The Ukrainian people are a resource base. People, territories, grain, lands. which used to belong to the Soviet period of times, infrastructure. This all as a resource base for the West. Back then, it was a barbarous use of forced labor of forcefully replaced people to the East Prussia in order to build German strongholds to provide for the production of military equipment. Perhaps something is different now. In the West and in many states of the European Union, this is the very same attitude as they adopt towards migrants. It is a resource base. Or perhaps someone has an illusion that they are being treated as equals, that they are being given the very same rights as the native citizens, the native dwellers of these territories. They are needed as a rightless man-force in these states, which are trying to distribute this ideology. There are no people there to work due to this LGBT ideology. And this is the very case which is happening with the Ukrainian people, humiliated people who had to flee their home states, Middle East, North Africa, and now Ukraine. They came to the light. It was the beacon of hope, as they thought. They were trying to survive.
But unfortunately, they are the resource base. It's hard to say what this will lead to, considering the processes that are currently taking place in the European states. But let's go back to the years since the beginning of the war. The neo-Nazis have been displacing our compatriots in order to refuel the working labor of that country. They were discriminated against, and they were labeled Ost, which worked as a label of their racial inferiority. The conditions were horrible. They were starving. They received no medical assistance. They were punished heavily. And neo-Nazi enslaved the civil population of the Soviet Union. And during the East Prussian events, our compatriots were like goods. And in 1945, they did not want their legal acts to be revealed, so they started mass killing Soviet citizens within the present-day borders of the Kaliningrad region. We analyzed the information which proves the theft of citizens in order to enslave them in the Third Reich and in order to further eradicate them. And according to experts and cases, that overall engaged in forced labor, over 4.7 million workers and 3.3 million prisoners of war from the ranks of the Red Army and Navy. And then the NATO countries are telling us about their technological advances, their superiority, that they're the best of the best, they're the smartest, just because of their blood right. That's because their whole life they have been diminishing people by enslaving, by selling slaves, and then by stealing prisoners of war and just civil population in order to employ them. And that was the middle of the 20th century. At the same time, in the East Prussia, in the present-day territory of Kaliningrad region, over 670,000 Soviet citizens and prisoners of war were held, of whom at least 211,000 were engaged in forced labor and over 114,000 were killed in gas chambers, short, or became victims of other inhumane methods of death. The bodies of victims, exhausted by hard labor and hunger, were burned in crematoria, and their ashes were used to fertilize farmland. Cases have been recorded in which decapitated or shot Soviet citizens were used as raw materials for the production of soap, leather goods, or furnishings. Interior and design created from human remains. This is how it was. The decision of the Kaliningrad Regional Court once again confirms the scale of the crimes committed during the Great Patriotic War, based on the criminal ideas of misanthropy and racial superiority. We will continue to tell you about it. We will tell you about it regularly, based on facts and documents. No one is forgotten, and nothing is forgotten. And speaking of modern forms of segregation, the sanctions hysteria around Russian sport and the admission of our athletes to international competitions is not subsiding. At a time when it would seem that sport should be used as a tool for developing and strengthening of social ties, building mutually respectful communication, bringing peoples closer together, uniting them, it continues to be used as a tool for settling political scores. And there is no exception to the most popular sport, football, which is no exception. In accordance with the decisions of the FIFA Council Bureau and the UEFA Executive Committee, Russian teams, national teams, and clubs have been suspended from participation in tournaments under the auspices of this organization until further notice. As a consequence, our country has already missed the world and continental championships in this sport. And recently, at a meeting in Hamburg, the Executive Committee did not include the Russian national football team in the draw, which is to be held on February the 8th, 2024 in Paris. We're speaking about the Nations League for the season 2024-2025. But it should be noted that the Nations League will be part of the qualifying process for the World Cup 2026. Respectively, the current actions of sports officials determine the future of this sport for 3 years ahead. We're convinced that this early non-admission of our country to the qualifying tournaments is evidence that football officials, instead of being engaged in their direct duties, consisting in the development of football, are aimed at the destruction of this sport in our country. Russia, on the contrary, stands for the development of international sports cooperation based on the principles of equality and non-discrimination, for providing all countries without exception with equal access to sports competitions. And despite this external pressure, we will continue to organize and participate in major international sports competitions and events on our territory. Next year, our country will host the International Multi-Sport Tournament in Combined Disciplines Games of the Future, February 21st, March 3rd, 2024, Kazan. The International Multi-Sport event, BRICS Sports Games, June 11th to 23rd as well in Kazan, as well as the international competition World Friendship Games, September 15th, 29th, Moscow and Yekaterinburg. We will be happy to see all athletes at these competitions, which will be organized in the spirit of friendship, mutual understanding, clean and fair fight. A few historic and humanitarian topics. At the 30th of November, there was a first commentation on the passing of humanitarian aid to Somalia, 25,000 tons of grain, and in total, it is planned to send 50,000 tons of Russian grain to Somalia. This humanitarian action was organized in accordance with the order of the President of the Russian Federation. The event was attended by the Minister of Interior of Somalia, Minister of Ports and Maritime Transport, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, and of course, Russian Ambassador to Djibouti and part-time in Somalia, Mikhail Golovanov. Somali partners expressed their sincere gratitude to the Russian side for the assistance rendered in ensuring food security in Somalia. And another topic, on December 7th, in the ancient Armenia, a terrible 10-magnitude earthquake with its epicenter in the city of Spitak. An earthquake took place. It destroyed many settlements and claimed the lives of tens of thousands of citizens. According to different estimates, as a result of the disaster, 9 million square meters of living space were destroyed, which amounted to about 20% of the entire housing stock of the country. More than 500,000 people were left homeless. In the moment of terrible grief, the whole huge country, friends from abroad, including the Armenian diaspora, came to the aid of the Armenian people. Chairman of the Council of Ministers of the USSR, Nikolai Ryzhkov, headed the Commission on Liquidation of the Consequence of the Disaster. Almost 100 highly qualified doctors, headed by the Ministry of Health of the USSR, Evgeny Chazov, flew from Moscow. The highest professionalism and heroism were demonstrated by 20,000 soldiers and officers, as well as volunteers who worked to clear the rubble. From all Soviet republics, humanitarian aid was coming. 45,000 builders arrived, and Russia will always remember this Spitak catastrophe, taking this misfortune of the Armenian people as its own. The memory of the noble sacrifice of the USSR people as a whole is also preserved. And I know the same applies to Armenia. The neighboring city of Spitak Gyumri, a remarkable monument by the Russian sculptor of Armenian origin Friedrich Sogoyan, has been erected with a carved inscription, "To innocent victims, merciful hearts." These days, the branch of the Russian Center of Science and Culture in Gyumri is holding a traditional international conference with the participation of architects, builders, specialists in the field of construction in earthquake-prone zone, urbanists, on the topical theme, Spitak Earthquake, a look from the past into the future. Among the goals of the forum is to identify the most problematic points in the urban environment and development of Gyumri city and form recommendations for their solution, taking into account the continuing high seismic activity in this region of Armenia. One of the lessons of Spitak is the realization of the inviolability of the centuries-old friendship of the Russian and Armenian peoples, which has been tested by various hardships. No matter how the political situation develops, our fraternal unity will overcome any difficulties. It has already withstood the test of time. Tomorrow, on the 7th of December, we mark the 55th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between our country and the Republic of Equatorial Guinea in 1968. For more than half a century, these relations have been traditionally friendly. Regular political dialogue and contacts at the highest levels are maintained. On November the 2nd, this year in Moscow, the President of the Russian Federation held negotiations with the President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, who visited Russia on an official visit. In the course of the conversation, Moscow and Malabo confirmed their mutual willingness to deepen foreign policy cooperation and maintain close coordination in the international arena. The sides discussed ways to intensify mutually beneficial cooperation in trade and economic, investment, humanitarian, and other areas, prospects for the implementation of joint prospects, including in the development of mineral resources, fuel and energy complex, infrastructure development in the country. Putin's previous meeting with his counterpart took place on October 24, 2019, on the margins of the first Russia-Africa summit in Sochi. In July 2023, a representative delegation headed by the Vice President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, responsible for defense and state security issues, took part in the second Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg. Russia and the Republic of Equatorial Guinea speak from similar positions in the United Nations and other international forums. We share common views in favor of polycentric model of world order, rejection of dictate and double standards in international relations, recognition of the right of peoples to determine their own path of development. These are the priorities for us. Within the frame of cooperation in the sphere of education, Russia assists Malabo in training national personnel. Since 1968, more than 1,000 Equatorial specialists have been trained in our country. In the 2023-2024 academic year, the government of the Russian Federation has allocated 30 scholarships for citizens of the Republic at the expense of the federal budget in order to develop cultural and humanitarian ties with the Republic and strengthen contacts with compatriots. The issue of registration and opening a parish of the Russian Orthodox Church in Malabo is being studied. We're grateful to our partners for their support in this endeavor. We're finalizing preparations for the resumption of Russia's diplomatic presence in the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. We're convinced that the imminent opening of the Russian embassy in Malabo will give an additional impetus to the development of the whole complex of bilateral interaction between our states. We take this opportunity to wish the people of Equatorial Guinea success and prosperity and all the best.
On December the 12th, the Republic of Kenya marks the 60th anniversary since the declaration of its independence. Over these years, the country has made significant progress in state building and social economic development. Today, Kenya is an active participant of the African community of the activities on the continent and sub-regional associations. It takes part in conflict settlement and promotion of integrational processes. We sincerely congratulate all the Kenyan people on this landmark event. On December the 14th, we will mark the 60th anniversary since the diplomatic relations were established between our two states. For many years, Moscow and Nairobi have traditionally friendly ties based on the principles of mutual respect. In May, the Minister Lavrov went to Nairobi on a working visit. During his visit, he had substantive discussions with the President of Kenya, with the President of the National Assembly, and, of course, within the Foreign Ministry. We are preparing for setting up a bilateral intergovernmental commission on economical cooperation. This year, the stock company Uralhim supplied Kenya with 34,000 tons of humanitarian assistance. Moscow is ready to work with its partners to further develop Russian-Kenyan relations, to build up mutually beneficial cooperation in trade, economy, investment for the benefit of our two peoples. Now I am ready to answer to all your questions. Международная жизнь, are you here? You have the floor. Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. The other day, NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg stated that the alliance would support Ukraine even if it is against the position of some member states. How could you comment on this information? One more time, please. NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg declared that despite the negative attitude of some NATO member states, NATO will provide this assistance anyway. Could you comment on this? The Secretary General of the state and perhaps any other leader of an international structure, I mean the head of the Secretariat, should found his decisions on the collegial opinion, which is being shaped on the equal basis. When states discuss, voice their opinions, their points of view, we are seeing the opposite this time. This is one more reaffirmation of this. We know very well how they find candidates for this position and how these candidates are approved. The main acting person, the main actor here is the United States of America. You understand quite well that the Secretary General of NATO is not an independent actor. He has very many deputies who are controlled by the United States of America, and they are playing the leading role. This is the aspiration of the U.S. foreign policy and the diplomatic sphere, the foreign policy sphere. They are playing the role of these so-called gray cardinals. Perhaps not even gray, they are very bright, they are very vivid personalities. We understand very well how this all is organized, but we should speak on the basis of the consolidated opinion. I do not remember any discussions within the alliance which would be demonstrated to all of us whether they had this question, what should we do with this Anglo-Saxon project. This is not a project of the NATO member states. This is an Anglo-Saxon project used by NATO as a coordinator to involve resources of member states to hybrid war against our country by the hands of the Kiev regime. On the name of whom is Stoltenberg speaking? If he is speaking on behalf of the United States, we should make an addition here. Perhaps he is doing this at the instruction of his deputy. Perhaps an order came from Washington directly. This cannot last for so much time. This is a game, and everyone understands who is who and who plays which role. This is the very same case with the European Commission. So many speakers, so many people. Everyone has a different point of view. No one substantiates their position, their points on the common opinion, on the agreed opinion. When these diverse opinions emerge immediately, in case they do not understand the situation, this all goes beyond the limits of reasonable things. Nevertheless, we see that the trend set by the United States, I mean the current regime in the White House, it is also evident they do not conceal it. They have to step up their efforts in order to oppose our states. They want money, they want power, they want everything. They always lack this. Why do they need this? Because their world reputation, their global reputation is at stake. America is held hostage to the ambitions of the Democratic Liberal Party, which is in power in the United States. But the elections in the United States are coming. They have to demonstrate the progress and the results. This is why Stoltenberg is made to voice these declarations in order to demonstrate that the NATO is united. It was never the case within NATO. For the last 10 years, no one is treated as equals in the NATO. That is why the NATO is not about democracy. It is about harsh bloc discipline, or rather dictatorship. The guidelines received from Washington should be carried out to the letter. Member states no longer have arms. They have no opportunity to fund Ukraine, to fund the Kiev regime. Their supervisors want them to bring blankets, to bring food, to bring everything that you have. And if you don't have anything of what was mentioned above, then you have to share the intelligence. Perhaps you think that I am exaggerating, but it is the real state of affairs. Also, many very powerful propaganda campaigns are standing behind this rhetoric. They should support the progress, the results of their efforts, because many countries, many actors have invested in them. That is why the NATO needs support from all the members. I believe that this is what our attitude should be like to this. From one point of view, this is an aggressive policy because we understand that the NATO is just a tool to defeat our country. From the other point of view, it is a part of a powerful political information campaign. It does not reflect the opinion of the peoples of those states who are part of the NATO. Despite the fact that the stock of the arms are exhausted already, that the tensions are mounting within the NATO member states because of the immense expenditure, they always need to support the US policy. Thank you very much. I have one more question. Last week, in information and in social space of Moldova, there was a vivid case when the local authorities refused to honor the veteran of the Great Patriotic War, the holder of the most prestigious Moldovan order, Pavel Gladkov. Do you remember the Nightingale tale? When the princess learned that the nightingale and the rose were real and not fake, she refused to accept them. In rhetoric, they are against Nazism, they are against the Third Reich. But when they see real, not fake fighters against the Nazism, against the Hitler regime, they refuse to accept this because they are not fake. And they give a round of applause to neo-Nazis. However, they say that they are given this applause not to neo-Nazis, they are given this applause to those who hate Russia. This is their explanation. This is the explanation provided by the collective West. Maya Sandu was appointed by them. She was brought to power to hate Russia, especially for this purpose. And to do this with all tools that she has at her disposal. Her main objective is to educate people, to teach them how to feel hatred towards the Russian people, to the people who had never experienced this. She is not very well at doing so. She is not very successful. Because the people of Moldova understand what a personality she really is. The Colonel Pavel Gladkov was a participant to Stalingrad and Kursk battles, the holder of 3 orders of the Great Patriotic War. He died in Chisinau when he was 102 years old. We express our sincere condolences to his relatives and to his friends. His funeral brought together many people, such as representatives of veteran organizations, social and political associations, diplomatic corps, the people of Moldova, who paid tribute to his courageous military deeds. Well, there were no representatives of Moldova authorities among them, despite the fact that Pavel Gladkov, as the holder of the Order of the Republic, the most prestigious award of the Republic of Moldova, should have had a ceremony in the central house of the National Army. However, his relatives were denied this right. If Gunko had died, I believe that she would ask to bury him a second time, in order to demonstrate her obedience to the Western supervisors. Also, the regime ignored all of the applications and all the requests made by the family and the community. This, one more time, demonstrates the resistance of the Moldova people, and this all gives us a reason to respect the Moldova people. We understand quite well that some people, they want to be cheated on, but I'm very surprised that our Moldovan brothers and sisters who are preventing and who are resisting these attempts.
And this is a lesson for all of us, how we can and how we should stand up to this behavior, to all those lies and this fake reality. How we should fight not for ourselves, but for our children, for future generations. The modern Moldovan leadership, can we even call it a leadership? It's a regime. Has its own heroes, and everyone remembers how in 2018 Maia Sandu, the chair of the Action and Solidarity back in the day, said that she considered the Romanian dictator Marshal Antonescu, a direct quote by the way, a historical figure about whom both good and bad things can be said. Why can't she say anything good about a historical figure who her ancestors said anything good about? The facts clearly confirm that the authorities of the Republic are conducting an open attack on the memory of the Great Patriotic War, attempting to rewrite history and promoting the glorification of the Romanian Nazis. They're taking the last things away from the Moldovan population. They already took away the language. Unfortunately, Moldovan citizens know their history. They have a strong spirit. They remember the Great Patriotic War from the tellings of their relatives. Some just read books that haven't yet been prohibited then. They remember the atrocities of the Nazis, the heroic battles of the Red Army to liberate their native land. They honor the heroes who shed blood and gave their lives for victory. Heroes like Pavel Gladkov, may he be remembered, may he rest in peace. Is RIA Novosti with us? Yes, hello. Madam Zakharova, how would you comment on the reports appearing in the media that British diplomats are preparing to put pressure on Kiev to sit down at the negotiating table with Moscow? I have no idea what negotiating table they're talking about, because that negotiating table, the very same British government has been knocked out of the hands of the Kiev negotiators back in 2022. And as the representatives of the Kiev regime itself are saying now, please remember the direct quote. The official interview that Boris Johnson tried to convince, and he managed to convince the Kiev regime to stop negotiations with the Russian side. So to comment on any leaks without names is very difficult. If this information has any source, as for the speaker or some official, it would be easier. But the position of Britain and the US is very evident, which is the prohibition for the Kiev regime to hold any negotiations and use of the Kiev regime in order to confront Russia. And I don't know where these leaks are coming from. I haven't seen anyone who confirmed it publicly, but sometimes these leaks are used by the British government and British authorities in order to prove themselves as peacekeepers. But in order to this ideology not even to reign, but just simply exist, they have to speak about it openly and prove their words with actions. And for now, their actions prove the opposite. The prohibition in any way of how to dissuade the Kiev regime from negotiating with Russia. And we also see the official actions of London by trying to expand the arms shipments to Kiev regime, by expanding the sanctions against the Russian Federation, forcing others into accepting those sanctions measures, as well as trying to bully our citizens in any and all areas, leading a campaign on how to cancel Russia, how to cancel our culture, how to hold a segregation in order to keep for themselves whatever works in their favor, as well as leading the anti-Russian campaign. Do you have any more questions? Thank you. We don't have any more questions. Moving on. Is the Chinese Media Corporation with us today? Yes, Madam Zakharova. These days in Dubai, there's a 27th session UN Conference on Climate Change. Chinese delegation is advocating for the climate financing in order to create a structure for the climate change, but as well as expanding the role of the UN fund in order to pay for the damages for the climate change. How important do you see that fund as for the climate change, and how do you assess the Chinese position and the China's interaction with Russia and China? I'd like to point out that this conference is still taking place. It started on the 30th of November, and it will take place until the 12th December. Russia's delegation, which is an interdepartment, which is headed by the special representative of Russia's President Rusal Dilgariev. There are 25 people in our delegation, as well as Igor Shumakov, Alexei Averchuk, Maxim Reshetnikov, Minister of Finance, Deputy Minister on Ecology and Climate, and many others. Minister of Foreign Affairs is represented by the Department of International Organizations, which is why the active phase of the participation of our delegation in this conference, we should leave it up to them to comment, because they're in the scope and in the center of the action, which is why we await their commentaries. And I'm sure that this question will be covered, and I'll pass along your request for the comment, and I'll make sure that you have these comments from themselves at the highest level. Thank you very much. We will be waiting. Moving on. Is the Moscow Post with us today? Yes, hello. We have 3 questions today. First, Washington Post claims that the summer offensive are made together with different forces, can we count that as an aggression against Russia and its allies, which was called an act of aggression by Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson of the U.S. Armed Forces? He was talking about providing the Ukrainian armed forces with data for strikes against Russian facilities using NATO reconnaissance aircraft. I really hope that you're quoting American nationals not because you don't trust us, but only as another proof, because the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has repeatedly stated that the targets for strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces using Western-made missiles are coordinated with the representatives of NATO countries, which provide the Kyiv regime with the relevant coordinates. So the Ukrainian armed forces and the Kyiv regime are executing the will of those countries, which are first and foremost the United States of America, out that the plans of the counteroffensive, or whatever it is they claim it is, whatever they call their atrocity of a failure, that they were not developed in Kyiv. Another point is that the Kyiv regime has no such potential, not only the means, but the potential of creating in the future infrastructure, military strategic potentials in order to lead battles of such scope. They have no material base for that. We're not just talking about the money, but there is nothing there, which is why all of that has been provided by the West. For example, the Washington Post wrote back in February that the Ukrainian military was carrying out strikes and using precision-guided systems solely on the basis of coordinates received from the Americans. So once again, it's not because I have no such information from our military officials, and that's why I'm quoting the American media, but this is because they themselves openly write about it as a proven fact. As for whether this can be considered as an act of war or aggression, how many times can we speak about the fact that the United States, the United Kingdom, NATO as a coordinated structure are waging a hybrid war against our country using Kyiv regime as their main instrument? And this phrasing has been presented, and there have been arguments proving that on different levels: presidents, Minister of Defense, legal base, State Duma, military officials who prove at the ground that from that side, not only Ukrainian and Russian speech, but even English and German and other languages of NATO countries are heard there. So we have evidence on our hands, and we have been speaking about it for a while. It is the West, the United States, the United Kingdom. They're using NATO as a collector in order to supply the Kyiv regime with weapons. And Ukrainians are simply demanded to continue fighting. So everything that the NATO officials are speaking about, including the General Secretary Stoltenberg, including trying to avoid the direct confrontation, it's just a game. It's a charade for them. Perhaps it's to draw away the attention, or maybe to try and wash away bad reputation from the regime that is entering Kyiv regime in front of their electors by trying to claim that they have nothing to do with it, they're not directly participating, they're simply helping the Kyiv regime, so on and so on. In reality, NATO and Washington are behind Kyiv's every move, and their true goal is to achieve Russia's defeat, Russia's strategic defeat on the battlefield, as they claim. But as you know, these plans are not destined to come true. There will be no such thing. It never happened before. There will be no such thing right now. And they cannot claim defeat over us.
Thank you for your detailed answer. My next question, what were the grievances of Bulgarian authorities when they prevented you from flying over the airspace from over the country? How did you manage to obtain the overflying permit from the Greek authorities? It is very funny. Let us analyze one more example. The European Union introduced sanctions against me. The definition was the following: for assisting in deploying Russian troops on the territory of Ukraine. It is ridiculous. But the most ridiculous thing is the following: these sanctions were put in place before the special military operation began. I'm not joking. This declaration on putting in place the sanction was made before the special military operation. If it was made before, it had been elaborated long before. It should be agreed upon. It should be developed and worked through. And the first messages I started to receive, according to various opinions, according to various sources, that they were planning to inscribe me in this sanction list. Speaking about the grievances, it is illogic. It is fake news. It is unfair, but no one is paying attention to these facts in the West. They are distorting half of the information, and the other half of the information they just omitted. Let us come back to the Bulgarian authorities. They could not explain themselves what they had done. They were saying that I was on the sanction list of the European Union, but the sanctions regulations of the European Union regarding personal restrictions provide for the possibility of European Union states to allow the entering of even persons who are under sanctions if they need to participate in OSCE activities. They are trying to direct their actions not against myself. These actions are directed against themselves only. They are demonstrating their nationalism, their Russophobia. Who is responsible for that? The authorities of Bulgaria. They are trying to promote the pro-Western agenda. They cannot even explain to their own people what they have done. Neither European Commission officials can explain this. They cannot explain their actions. Just as it is, they could not even make references to the document I mentioned. It is absurd. And as you know, the Greek authorities gave an overflying permit for the Russian airplane. It seems that the Greek authorities, the Greek diplomats, are more aware of the European Council documents than the authorities of Bulgaria. My following question. President Putin called upon foreign ambassadors to visit Russia exhibit at Vladimir Expo. Will you have a collective excursion for diplomats? On November the 15th, the Department of State Protocol, together with my department, with the support of the presidential administration and the organizing committee, organized the visit of foreign diplomatic missions who have accreditation in Moscow for the Vladimir Expo. High-ranking diplomats visited this exhibition. But given the fact that the address of President Putin on December the 4th was addressed to the newcomers, to the newly appointed ambassadors, including to the ambassadors from non-friendly states, we would do everything possible with great pleasure for them to visit this exhibition. There is a great number of events in the framework of this exhibition. There is a great number of stands there is a great number of expositions. I have visited this exhibition multiple times, and I made a speech there on the first day, on the day of the inauguration of this exhibition, and later I came once again. This is a very good exposition, a very interesting one. This is the first event of this kind for our state. I recommend it to everyone. Thank you very much. Reuters, are you with us? I apologize. Let me add something to the previous question. This exposition, which is taking place at Vedenka Expo, but there are also traditional exhibits. It is not the only exhibit. It is the only large-scale exhibit which encompasses all the federal entities of the Russian Federation. It speaks about its economical potential, economic progress, capabilities, with the participation of the heads of federal entities in the investment events. But there is a similar event. It is a very bright, vivid event which takes place in Moscow, in the capital of the Russian Federation. It also demonstrates the capability and the potential of the peoples of the Russian Federation. This is a Ladya exhibit. I believe that the inaugurating ceremony will start on December the 13th. There you can analyze, you can have a look at the progress of our peoples which live in the Russian Federation by the way of craft. I invite everyone to join this event. The Department of State Protocol is also involved in organizing excursions for the diplomatic corps. The Glav UPDK is also an active participant of these efforts. I would like to seize this opportunity and to speak about one more event, which is a fantastic success. And for foreign correspondents, this will be a very interesting event. You can not only have a look at all the things which are exhibited, you can buy something. It is a very good event for everyone because especially in the winter, you have all the crafts from all the regions. They are brought together. You can take part in workshops, you can see some shows, you can take part in lectures, and to get acquainted with the culture. It is a marvelous event. I recommend it to everyone. Ms. Zakharova, you partially answered to our question considering Shalan the Young. Many representatives of the U.S. administration, they say that they are running of time and they are running of resources for Ukraine. This is why they are trying to have one more package for Ukraine assistance. They need the assistance of the U.S. authorities. I do not want to have an authority, to have a mandate to find resources for supporting the Nazi Kiev regime. But in case they are in a deadlock, they have no assistance from the Congress, they could send a computer or a cell phone owned by Hunter Biden. I believe that they would earn a lot. They would earn a great sum of money. It would be a beautiful fundraising activity. Many people would pay a fortune for this. I believe that they should consider this option. Thank you very much. Anna Dalu, you have the floor. Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. Dmitry, Anadolu Agency. We have the following question. Partially, you commented on this question. Perhaps you will have something to add. An American journalist, Seymour Hersh, in his article for Substack website, he shared that Kiev and Moscow are holding secret negotiations at the level of the heads of the general staff of the two states. Also, the diplomatic personnel of the Great Britain are pushing on the President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, to sit down to the negotiation table. Can you comment on this? You were right to say that I have already answered this question, but I repeat the basic principles. I have no information regarding the behind-the-scenes negotiations. I found no information in this regard. I can say nothing. I can only say what happens in reality. Perhaps it is some kind of a secret wish, a secret aspiration of some Western elites. Perhaps they want to step up this process by doing so. Maybe they want to have an information background to represent themselves as peacekeepers. I cannot say where this information comes from, but I have another kind of information. The Western states, first and foremost the United States and the Great Britain, they prohibited the Kiev regime and their delegations of their parliaments to take part in the negotiations with Russia, and later, through special institutions, they made this ban, they made this prohibition legal. They do not want a Ukrainian conflict to end. They want to continue this story in any format. The main criteria are the following: to be toxic, to claim lives of people living in the mentioned regions, to exhaust financially, physically, and morally. In case with Ukraine they managed to do so, there is nothing of the kind there. No political, no moral forces. The Ukrainian story is drawing to its end in the framework and in the parameters of a sovereign state of Ukraine. They did not manage to do this trick with us. Let me reiterate, there is a chronological order of events. There are historical facts, the systemic foundation, which gives me every reason to say they did not manage to do this before, and they will not manage to do this in the future. You should study the facts. It is a good reason for us to remember all of this. Let me reiterate. You should see the real facts and to use them. They are the following: the two Anglo-Saxon states who were at the top of this Ukrainian anti-Russia campaign, provoking conflicts, triggering coup d'etats in Ukraine, promoting the neo-Nazi ideology as new Ukrainian heroes, and toppling the true heroes by robbery, by blackmail, by corruption, and by instilling this corrupt logic to the Ukrainian establishment. They closed for the Kiev regime and for the Ukraine this trap. They had no opportunity to pursue the path of negotiations. This is a pure fact. You cannot deny this. This is documented, and there are many witnesses to what had been happening. We only saw the exterior And now we are hearing the opinions of the witnesses, of those who had access to the relevant information. Everyone understands that the West betrayed Ukraine. The West cynically took the advantage of the confidence placed in them by the Ukrainian people. They believed in the best future, in the best times for their people. They shouldn't have done this.
They should have appreciated the input of their ancestors who loved their native land, who protected it, and not expect sudden free ticket, free pass into the bright future without any efforts. But one way or another, they put their trust in the West, and the West betrayed them. They lied to them. Perhaps there will be speakers who will show their face and will put their names and will explain what they meant. Then we will be able to comment on that. Thank you very much. Thank you. Our Newsroom with us today. Hello, Newsroom, right here. We have two questions. First, how does Moscow appreciate Armenia's input into looking for different arms sources? At the same time, Secretary of Security Council of the Republic Grigoran discussed military cooperation between the countries. At the same time, the Ministry of Defense of the Republic stated that Yerevan is not going to sue Russia because Armenia has not received the paid weapons. So the problem should be solved in the atmosphere of partnership. Yes, I understand you. I think there are a lot of examples of how the West can lie. And I don't want the Armenian people to be lied to by their Western friends. For example, France's Bastion vehicles are not what it seems, and we can understand that in the context of the special military operation. And I went into detail about this at the briefing on November 22nd. And a lot of mass media sources, unfortunately affiliated with current Armenian authorities, didn't distort that information and didn't conduct anti-journalist activity and let the population of their own country see the direct quotes and direct speeches. Maybe it would be easier to understand in order to once again understand that the West is presenting false information. And why is it false? Because different military equipment from different countries never contributed to the defense capabilities of a country. As for the Ministry of Defense and their claim that you quoted, how we should be solved in the atmosphere of partnership, we can only welcome this suggestion. We understand that the Russia's Ministry of Defense, they have the same approach. Thank you very much. The second question, Russian President Vladimir Putin has promised to think through systematic measures to ensure the return of Russians from unfriendly countries to their homeland. What methods is the Foreign Ministry currently working on? I would like to point out that the topic of promoting and ensuring voluntary resettlement of compatriots to the Russian Federation, including Russian citizens, especially those who are discriminated against in states of residence with unfriendly governments, is in the constant focus of our intention through cooperation with the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia, who are directly charged with the functions of coordinator and lead implementer of the state program to assist voluntary resettlement of compatriots living abroad to the Russian Federation. And we carry out such work on an ongoing basis. The potential of the state program allows, if necessary, to quickly adapt its mechanisms to modern realities and to different categories of migrants. And as one of the measures of systemic support, it is envisaged to simplify the procedure for participation of Russians in the state program. In particular, presidential decree on amendments to certain acts of the President of the Russian Federation, number 872 of November 22nd of this year, introduces the institution of repatriation, which comes into power from January the 1st. I will verify the exact date, I would also like to note that repatriates include not only Russian citizens permanently residing abroad as of February 24, 2022, but other persons from among compatriots. These include those who have withdrawn from the citizenship of Russian Federation, those who were born or permanently resided in the territory of the former USSR and were citizens of the former USSR, and those who have relatives in the direct descending line who were born or permanently resided in the territory of the RSFSR or the territory of the Russian Empire or the USSR within the state border of the Russian Federation and had the corresponding citizenship. The state program also provides various benefits, social support measures for them. In addition, repatriates are exempted from confirming their Russian language skills, which is a mandatory condition from the new year for applying for participation in the state program, in accordance with Presidential Decree number 219 on March 30th, 2023. As for the date that I mentioned before, I will let you know shortly. Do you have any more questions? No, that is all. Moving on. Is Al-Mayadeen with us today? Yes, good afternoon. Hello. Madam Zakharova? The Minister Cabinet of Israel has made a decision to prohibit the stream of Al-Mayadeen in Arab, Spanish, and English languages, and this model used by the West against the Russian mass media. And recently, after the strike of the armed forces of Israel in the South Lebanon, 3 journalists of our channel died while executing their powers. Here in Al-Mayadeen, this is the preparation work in order to get rid of the streaming of our channel. How should we react to this approach, which goes against any laws and norms? Let me divide your question into several parts. First of all, you draw comparisons between the Western states against the Russian mass media. Unfortunately, I cannot agree because those are different situations, with all due respect. And of course, I will mention it towards your mass media or the journalists who, in a similar situation, what happened. But we're talking about a year-long systematic bullying campaign of Russian mass media, Russian journalists, and everyone who interacted with them from the information field. This includes all forms, from labeling, from segregation online, to physical violence, including no reaction to the assassination of our journalists, and as well aid and abating towards eradication of Russian mass media. This has been an ongoing practice for many, many years, despite the fact that Russia, as a state, has provided tons of information to international institutes with detailed information and proof on those events. So, in my opinion, as for the Russian mass media, this is an unprecedented kind of story, because when the Third Reich tried to eradicate media sources that did not go in line with their ideology, throw them over the wall, they were doing it first and foremost towards themselves. And later on, after declaring war, but after striking and attacked and invading a country, but during a so-called peaceful time, and in the peaceful time, to use a whole set of measures that is usually used during the war in order to bully the journalists, and going as far as to physically trying to eradicate them. Unfortunately, I don't think during the modern history I can recall a single situation like that. As for the safety of journalists in the escalating zone of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the situation is truly catastrophic. Some 40 to 50 media representatives have already been killed, according to various sources. That's only over the last 2 months. This is an unprecedented situation. Such a mass. And it's not just death due to natural causes of conflict, but they have been targeted, they have been killed, and there is proof of that. Over such a short period of time and in such large numbers, I don't think I can recall any examples like that. The outbreak of armed confrontation has highlighted the complete dysfunction of those mechanisms for protecting the rights of the media and their staff that were created precisely for such situations. I remember how the initiators of a lot of resolutions, conventions who protect the rights of the mass media, of journalists located in the conflict zones, the initiators were the Western states. They came up with a lot of juridical combinations, a lot of instruments of implementing those documents. And look how those very same states who were pushing it forward in the international organizations, they are the ones who are staying silent, who are complicit, and they're doing nothing. Not only to publicly denounce it, but at least express public condolences, or at least put out a statement in order to denounce such effects. And I've already mentioned this today, but the most astounding fact is that those suffering are not just mass media of the region, but the Western mass media. Either Western media as an institution, or people who are interacting with the Western mass media or find themselves affiliated with Western media. And despite all of that, we see nothing from them. These are not just double standards. That's a destruction of any standards in this area. Those are shameful acts that should serve as an anti-example of how a state should conduct itself. How they take the stand on the platform and they speak for the higher level of security for the journalists, but when their own journalists from their own country are dying, they're doing nothing, not even expressing condolences. And the opposing sides are in fact not taking into account all the obligations and principles that have been developed over the years, which are supposed to guarantee safe conditions for the work of media representatives. And the matter is not limited to mutual accusations, blockings of broadcasting, and other obstacles to activity. Journalists are killed there almost daily, along with civilians on both sides, medics, rescue workers, and employees of international organizations, and they die en masse. We believe that only the elimination of the root causes of the conflict through the faithful implementation by all parties concerned of the agreements previously reached and enshrined in the relevant UN Security Council resolutions, which are based on the two-state formula, will make it possible to halt this spiral of violence and find a long-term, sustainable, peaceful solution to this protracted, violent confrontation.
Thank you very much. Tverskaya 13. You have the floor. Are you with us? Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. We have one question. Russian media said that around 40% of relocates 50% of relocates returned to Russia. Do you think that this is associated with a more stable situation inside Russia, or perhaps the key cause is Russophobia? The both aspects that you mentioned, the lack of security in the regions where people came, well, the Russophobia they face with, and they understand that it is not the case of their political opinion, which is not accepted by the West, but it is the case of the hatred, of the nationality-based hatred, which dates back to many centuries. It is very surprising. It is that you ask this question because many people realize that they have made a mistake, that their action was a mistake, not due to some financial reasons, material reasons, lack of comfort, call it as you like, perhaps nostalgia, perhaps the lack of possibility to exist without friends or family. And some of them understand that they have committed a dramatic mistake. Many of them seceded to the anti-Russia propaganda. Those were people who were promoting the subject. They were presenting some documents. They recruited the agitators. They were creating these information in the media space in order to seamlessly bring out the people at the best possible on the best possible conditions. Also, they were people who were influencing them from the psychological point of view. They were convincing them to leave Russia immediately because the borders would be closed, that they would never be able to see their relatives abroad. It was the case of panic between many of them. I'm talking to people who send messages, applications to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Many of them implore, just help us. There were people who, in the fuss of this insane situation, they even refused Russian citizenship, and now they want it back. Those who kept Russian citizenship, they are back. They are trying to bring back their children to kindergartens and to schools. They are trying to obtain this package of social benefits again. They suspended themselves the implementation of these social benefits. They were leaving with a fuss, with a pomp, but they are returning quietly. I believe that we all should remember, if we meet people who sincerely regret their actions, who sincerely regret having left Russia, who sincerely want to be back, not to make obstacles, not to do harm to the country, but being cautious of the fact that they were cheated on, we should perceive them as it was told in the parable of the prodigal son, and not to make a campaign directed against them. We should not mock at them, not to feel superior towards them. But to treat them decently. As it was mentioned in the parable of a prodigal son, this is a century-long wisdom. Your attitude should be just the same. This is a sincere understanding of a mistake. Not from the point of view that they will be able to gain some profit here, and they would join the enemy later, and start making obstacles and doing harm to us. But when we are speaking of a tragedy, of a human tragedy, our attitude should be as I have already described. If it is all, Sputnik, are you with us? Yes, Ms. Zakharova, we have 3 questions. I apologize. Let me add something on the question made by about the presidential decree to make amendments on November the 22nd, 2023, to the institution of repatriation. It enters into force since January the 1st, 2024. Thank you. Thank you for your patience, for letting me make this addition. Sorry for interrupting you. You have the floor. In his interview, the Russian ambassador to Germany, Mr. Nechayev, stated that never before, including in the most difficult periods of the Cold War, Russian diplomats had not faced such challenges in their efforts and their work. The embassy faces a boycott, not only on the federal, but even on the local level. Where do we face a similar situation? How do our ambassadors react? What adjustments did we have to make? If we speak in general, there are some peculiar details in every state, but generally speaking, these are the so-called non-friendly states. Speaking about the ordeals which fell upon the fate of our diplomats, I'm speaking about the consul generals of other diplomatic missions abroad. They all have missions which are cooperating closely with our embassies and perhaps the missions of some other state bodies. There were different methods of psychological influence, blackmail. They were told that their lives were ended, that their motherland refused them. Do you remember that in the times of the Great Patriotic War, the Nazi soldiers were saying that Russian Ivan, give up, your government does not need you, but the Nazi German government will take care of you. There were cell phone hacks, cyber attacks. Personal data was used for very same purposes, not only of the diplomats, but also of their family members. Even there were campaigns in front of the embassies. They put down the telephones of assistance for the diplomats, for them to contact special services of the countries they were in. Also, they faced physical violence. They were facing the repeated attempts of arsons, of different violent attacks. And third, they did not have access for receiving financial aid of our diplomatic missions.
Different financial mechanisms so that people could not even get their salaries. And against that backdrop, there are also different campaigns. As Akhmatova wrote, to leave Russia behind forever. As she said, leave your homeland. Inability to pay for your apartment, the threat of cutting off of electricity, of your homeline. And the creation on different areas around the embassy of this toxic environment, bullying online, falsification of information, using personal data about your family, the members of the family, threats of life, as well as following them around, a lot of recruiting, which is gaining ground insanely fast. We have already commented on that numerous times. This is what the Russian diplomats were facing. But I think the true honor of the diplomatic service is once you withstand that test, and it proves that our colleagues have withstood that test. how would you, and as well as pushing out of the information field, we have a lot of ambassadors who have no chance to publish an official statement that proves something wrong. As I've already mentioned, that Russian media is blocked in the Western, then our embassies also have the only source of gathering information on the official steps of the Russian Federation, and even that was blocked under the threat of anything as well as physical violence. And to continue that, how would you characterize Russia's relations with the Western states today? Is it a Cold War? Or maybe there's a different term. We've already done that. We've already characterized that. I'm surprised that you're not using it. This is a hybrid war instigated by the West against Russia through the hands of the Kiev regime. This is a clear term. We don't have to come up with anything else or to add anything to it. There is no Russia-Ukraine war. There is only the use of the West, of Ukraine by the West, in order to confront Russia, which is what we refer to as a hybrid war against Russia. Why is it a hybrid war? Because it is being conducted through another state, through political means, by the political officials who the West has led to those territories, so under the different flag. It includes any kind of trade wars that have been started against our country way before. This is an information aggression against our country, use of any and all new technologies in order to instigate information and psychological pressure, those cyber attacks, calls from the Ukrainian territory under the pretense of representatives of our law enforcement or bank workers, calls of bomb threats of civil infrastructure objects. It's the use of financial institutes to create as many difficulties for us as possible in our connections with the rest of the world through payments and so on. Creation of conditions where it's impossible to develop whole areas within our country by blocking cooperation in technological science area, which is why this is indeed a hybrid war that has been instigated by the West against our country through Kiev regime. And another question. As for the Moldova position, Renaissance Party started in its Telegram channel that the idea of uniting the Republic with Romania is being opposed against the will of the people, and this is the embodiment of the insolence of the current government, which should have already started respecting the statehood of its country. In your opinion, Madam Zakharova, how realistic are the chances of unification of Romania and Moldova today? I think that taking into account that the Sandu regime is imposing to the Moldovan population the agenda of reunification of Romania, and the Moldovan people can rightfully ask the question, if this is on the agenda of the Sandu regime, why can't we unite with Romania on Moldova's conditions and just call it all Moldova? Thank you very much. I think that just about sums it up. Thank you. But I would also like to additionally present that if you think this is revolutionary, that I would like to present a historical fact that Moldovan state is a lot older than the Romanian. It takes start in the 14th century, as well as the writing and the language, which is based on Syriacs. And I am sure that the Moldovan people remember their history. They're trying to preserve their language, their culture, and they're interested in the further development of its statehood. At the basis of the democratic process, there's a principle of representation of the people, a realization of the wishes and interests of the population of the country, which delegates to the authorities the promotion of their wishes, of their goals, their tasks, Sandu is doing exactly the opposite. The population wants something, and she's doing the exact opposite. It is clear that the Sandu regime has not brought more democracy, but only took that away. It's clear, but I don't think that it's forever. It's just a temporary. It cannot go on forever. We would like to hope that current government of Moldova will stick by the principle of democracy and common sense, but all their actions prove the opposite. Thank you very much.
Veronica, are you with us? Good afternoon, Ms. Zaharova. I have 3 questions. Some Armenian authorities believed that the problems we had in the Verkhney Lars control point, the political pressure on Armenia. How could you comment on this situation? These are some Armenian authorities who believed this to be political pressure, and some of them did not. The second point, which proves that this is not the opinion of the whole country and the whole political establishment, is the fact that just recently, the other day, the Eurasian Economic Commission held consultations as part of a dialogue of specialized agencies of Russia and Armenia. Especially the experts touched upon the issues of Verkhney Lars control point. Also, they spoke about agricultural product supplies. The consultations were very substantive, they were objective, they were aimed at seeking mutually acceptable solutions to the conflict. We have mechanisms in place. In case if there are problems, we should apply these mechanisms, as it is the case now. I believe that these authorities, these representatives who feel the pressure, they should read Armenian media. And they should think whether the Russian representatives are under pressure when they spread fake news and misinformation. You always have to look in the mirror before accusing someone else. My second question. On November the 30th, Armenian-Azerbaijani Commission on border delimitation held a meeting. Given that the trilateral working groups to unblock transport links in the Caucasus region are not working, how will the trilateral format of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia will be working? We welcome the work of this commission. We want to launch the practical efforts to delimitate borders. We are ready to provide all the needed assistance in the delimitation activities themselves. It provides for the needed maps, for the needed materials. It was reaffirmed by Minister Lavrov yesterday when meeting with his Azerbaijani counterpart during his meeting of between the foreign ministers of the Caspian littoral states. When speaking about the work of the working group, the resuming of their efforts, we have managed to make some progress in this regard. If there is the political will, we could finalize the work and start practical efforts. We believe that the protraction of these efforts would work against the interest of the region. Speaking about the peace agreement, we sent an invitation to the states to take part in the meeting in Moscow, in the trilateral meeting. In Baku, they reaffirmed their commitment to negotiations. We cannot say the same about our Armenian partners. Perhaps they believe that their new advisors from Washington, Brussels, and Paris could offer something more interesting, something more efficient. I don't know whether it is true. I believe that first and foremost, you should analyze the previous experience and the experience of your neighbors. We know what was the result of the get-togethers in Prague and in Brussels. Perhaps the Armenian people is not aware of this because they do not receive sufficient information. In this case, they should analyze different sources and see to themselves how it was going on in Prague and Brussels. Perhaps the situation could repeat itself, presenting themselves as Armenian best friends. The Armenia could face some unpleasant surprises, as it was the case in Brussels and in Prague, as described, as presented by the West. Everything will be distorted by the relevant Armenian mass media. Not by anyone, but by some, for sure. It was the West who initiated to omit the issues of the Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians, their rights and their security. Does anyone remember this when they want to place confidence in Western advisors? These provisions should have been put on paper. We wouldn't have questions what people who fled their homes should do. They were trusting the Armenian government because the Armenian government had promised a lot, but their rights were not put into paper. It was the initiative of the West. How many times should the West manifest its position so that we understand that they never act in the interest of the people of other states? They always act in their own interests. They need all other states in order to implement and to put into life, into practice, their own interest. There is a historical proof of this. We know this all from history. You said that you have some more questions. Yes, I have one more question. Yesterday, Russian mass media telegram channels mentioned that Azerbaijan is producing munitions for Ukrainian armed forces. I would like to know your position in this regard. This is not the first case when we learn that Azerbaijan is supporting Ukraine. I just ask you, next time, when you see confirmed or non-confirmed data on any other country which is producing munitions for the Kiev regime, you can say just at once that Russia condemns these actions. Russia condemns all manifestations of support for the Nazi terrorist Kiev regime. It refers to all the states, no matter what relations we have with them. These munitions kill our civilians, children, women, elderly people, no matter who produces them and when they are doing this, who pays for that. We have an unwavering position. I have no option to answer in a different way. Just at once and always, you can quote my words.
If this is all, is Voice of the Fatherland with us? I think they're with us always, but I mean the network edition, of course. Yes, of course. Thank you. Vladimir Putin characterized today's battle for sovereignty and said that it has a national liberation character. Is this the official position of Russia? Of course. How else would it be? We have been speaking about it, and we are speaking in the context of our country, in the context of the entire world. Just a small example, how many times the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergey Lavrov, speaks about the de-dollarization as a liberation from the pressure of the system that is used for the wrong purposes. No one minded using it as an equal financial tool on a legal basis, but as an instrument of trying to alter an internal situation, as well as an element of trade wars. No one wants to participate in that. And the majority of countries understand that perfectly, and that includes our country and the international majority. An involvement in the international information field was conducted under the pretext of globalization, but then we understand that these countries are present through our resources, but we are not allowed to be present them, so which is why we're being blocked there. Our journalists are being criticized, are being pushed out, our live streams are being shut down. And this is bullying and enslavement. They're trying to undermine the situation in different countries, our neighboring countries, who we have historically good relations with in all areas. What else is it if not an effort to put us in a direct dependence from that? They understand that we have our own policy, our own course in economics and internal and external politics, our strategy in finance and energy. And we're gaining authority all over the world by genuinely cooperating with other countries, and not how they're raising the budgets by continuing to threaten the world. So, of course, for us, this is a national liberation. But it's not just true for us. If you look at the statements of the representatives of the African continent, of Asian countries, of Latin America, all of them are saying the exact same thing. We're simply at the head of this liberation battle. And this multi-polarization is exactly proof of the liberation of the world for equal treatment, for equality, for national pride. And sometimes people try to destroy that over the centuries. There are new centers of development trying to take sovereign decisions. Countries put at the forefront their national interests. They shed the pressure of the monopoly, fight for the right in order to lead the independent political course and the democratization of international relations, as well as equal use of sources at our planet in order for all humankind to use it, and not only the majority or the Western countries who not just use it as their own development tool, but also by trying to bring down others, which is why Russia is at the forefront of this liberation struggle. We are open for honest partnership with all those who are guided in international affairs by the principles of equality and mutual respect. Together with like-minded people, we are reducing our dependence on Western currencies, switching to alternative mechanisms for foreign economic settlements, and working on the formation of new international transportation corridors and supply chains. We will continue to fight for truth and justice, for the voice of all countries. And it's not an effort to make all humankind happy in one day or in 1 year and impose our sense of justice. No way. We never claimed we were doing that. But our goals should be really morally high ideals and tasks. They should be guiding us. The world should thrive for more justice and not aid and abet in despotism, and exploitation, and robbery, and lies. Of course, this will be hard, and we will not be able to achieve it right now, but there is no alternative. Otherwise, we're going to regress back to the times of slave trade. Thank you. Madam Zakharova, you also partially answered this question, we have a second question. Could you present in detail who exactly is our country being liberated from? I've just mentioned that from the ideological, political, financial pressure and dependence of those who historically put themselves above everyone else. World imperialism, collective West, sometimes they put a name to it, or we put a name to it. Historically, they prove themselves by this characteristical quality. The countries who claim that they're above others, they're better than others, and they give themselves, without any authority, the ability to segregate people, to take away resources, to destroy countries and entire populations. But historically, it had different names and presented itself in different ways. But I think at the core of it, it's the same. And I just think that it's the clearest manifestation under barrel. And we stand against everyone and the philosophy that envisions dividing the world under the beautiful garden that can do anything they want and the wild jungles who should be working in the favor of this beautiful garden. I think he himself did not understand what he was talking about, but he said those words and this ideology. And this pressure we're trying to get rid of, and mostly we have been able to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Zakharova. Together magazine, are you with us? The situation in the world is very complicated. We see many tragic and dramatic events, but we have to think about our children and grandchildren. During the winter break, many will go to the Moscow Zoo. During the September briefing regarding the citizenship of the baby panda, you suggested that there should be a contest for a name, and this contest is in place. More than 2,000 people have already voted. There are 2 Russian names on the list, together with 8 Chinese ones. Because you were the initiator of this contest, if it is not a state secret, could you share your opinion? What name you would vote for? And because you speak Chinese, how should we pronounce correctly the Chinese names? Thank you for reminding me about this. Frankly speaking, I forgot about this, that this initiative was made during the briefing at the Foreign Ministry of Russia. I am only following the very cute pictures and videos of the Moscow Zoo. This baby panda, you cannot just be indifferent to this. There are many tragic events, many tragic developments, and sometimes you want to divert your attention, to distract yourself from this, and this is a very good opportunity to do so. And we should give credit to the Moscow Zoo, who informs the people. They are doing this very professionally. The second point, speaking about the so-called citizenship of a baby panda, the 2 pandas were brought in line with the agreement with the People's China Republic. Each was a so-called rent. And speaking about baby pandas, they also should be brought back to China. Since the years of 1980s, pandas were presented as a gift, and now this is not happening any longer. This is a rent. This is a rent for now. But when pandas were brought back from NATO countries, are brought back to China, pandas in the Moscow Zoo are feeling very comfortable, and they even have babies. I won't conceal my position regarding the name. I have a favorite one. Generally, the people of Moscow are voting through a platform, but I see that there are many people who would like to vote from other regions. This privilege is obtained by the people living in the Moscow region, but I have a favorite name. It is my personal preference. And I believe if there are bears, there should be a Masha. Thank you very much for your question. In this beautiful context, we are ready to end our briefing. I wish you every success. Thank you.